This is Believe in Big Ten. I'm Tom Hannifan. He is Rhett Lewis from the NFL and Big Ten Network, and he is also a former Indiana Hoosier. So you can guess what we're going to be talking about on this week in Believe in Big Ten. Indiana continues to roll. We're going to get into the full slate of games from this past weekend and look ahead a little bit to what's happening in Week 12. Believe in Big Ten is presented by BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action and the ability to watch the games as they happen with the largest selection of odds on everything. Football, the NBA, college basketball, the NHL, the UFC, and other MMA events. Head to betonline.ag today to get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. Believe in Big Ten is presented by BetOnline. The game starts here. As always, like, comment, subscribe, rate us, turn on notifications. Check us out on YouTube. Check us out on all of our audio-only platforms, Apple, Google, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. We appreciate it so much. We are going to start with the big game from this past weekend. Indeed. It was a lighter slate, I will say that, for the Big Ten, obviously, compared to the way it was before. But the biggest one for our purposes on this podcast was Indiana hosting Michigan. Michigan falls by a score of 20-15 at Indiana. Indiana remains undefeated at 10-0. It was a good win, obviously, for Indiana, Rhett, and I know you're excited about it. You got to watch it from the comfort of your own home.
Right.
Thrilled for you as a broadcaster. However, it did raise some questions because Indiana has been thumping people most of the season. This one, there was a glimmer of hope for Michigan in the second half, and that score 20-15. I expected a fight from Michigan, a defensive fight especially, but it kind of put what Indiana is into perspective for me, but I want to hear what you think.
Yeah, so I think, your description, from a 30,000 foot view makes a lot of sense. This was the closest margin of victory by a long shot that Indiana's had this season. They did not score they scored, a field goal, right? But barely scored a point in the second half. They were outgained or had, such a minimal offensive output in the second half. It was, that part of it was crazy. But it was a win for Indiana over Michigan. And I think that's ultimately what this comes down to. Think about that. That has only been said twice this century. Like there's a lot of this that again continues to be like this exercising of demons, for Indiana this year, right? First 9-0 start, first 10-0 start, beating Michigan, beating Michigan State, getting the old brass spittoon. Ohio State's obviously looming in 2 weeks, and we'll get to that. But I think what this did is it showed you again that this team is maybe the best team cohesively that the Big Ten has to offer. I'm not sure anybody plays complementary football the way that Indiana has been able to play it this year. Sure, are there more talented teams out there? Absolutely. Ohio State on paper is probably the most talented team in football. But, Oregon, sure, I'll give it to them, more talented. You could even make the case that there are more talented. Michigan was a more talented team at many positions. Obviously not at the quarterback spot, and that was a big reason why it ended up losing, because there were some throws to be had in that game that could have made this a lot more nerve-wracking at the end for Indiana. So really proud of the defense. Bryant Haynes continues to be a Broyles Award candidate as the top assistant in college football for what he's done as Indiana's defensive coordinator this year. Same could be said for the offensive guys too, and we'll get to that. But defensively, this was big. And this is a game where Indiana started to get their depth tested a little bit, Tom. Justice Ellison, Miles Price, two key contributors, took big hits in this game and left the game. Miles Price did not return. Justice Ellison did. They were down to their fourth offensive guard to start this game. Drew Evans, who came in for Nick Kidwell to start the season and started every game, was lost in practice earlier in the week and didn't start. Tyler Stevens started. So there's some depth that happens and that pops up, some depth issues here late in the season, but they persevered. They found a way to win. A gritty, gutty win, as Curt Cignetti said. And for that, in November, pretty dang good.
It's critical, and especially the way that their record has gone thus far, it still feels like Indiana has to win out to get themselves into the playoff. Like for sure, the Ohio State game, like they're fortunate they've got a bye week this weekend, so you get a chance to chill. But you're at Ohio State on the 23rd. I've every expectation Ohio State is still winning, doesn't take a second loss by the time that comes around. So there is that avenue of, does Indiana have to be perfect to make the college football playoff? I mean, you'll make the Big Ten title game if you do that, obviously. You will beat Ohio State. But to me, and this is my Penn State bias a little bit, Penn State's near loss to Ohio State, while I was deflated by it, still one possession inside the 5 could have changed that entire game. Indiana surviving a now 5-5 Michigan team as their biggest win. If it is their biggest win, I'm curious what you think in that regard, but it makes me feel like more like, hey, but the eye test is going to go to Penn State above Indiana.
Yeah, eye test makes me want to gouge my eyes out, Tom. I get it.
Truth, like when you look and you watch these teams on paper, and it's like there's a little bit of a gap.
So a couple things. Yeah. I think Indiana's in the playoff. I think they're in at this point. If that is, of course, if this is not a 50-point blowout to Ohio State, I think how that plays out.
Important. I agree with that.
I think
close.
Matters.
It's a very different argument. Yes.
And I think they roll against Purdue, all things considered there, although that is a rivalry game and you do never know. But again, they lost 45-0 to Ohio State this week. So it's been a train wreck for the train up at West Lafayette this year. So yeah, for IU, I do feel like they have, I would call it a 90% chance to make the playoff at this point. And I think that's kind of what some of the indicators are. If you look out at, ESPN's, playoff predictor index, you look at SP plus, all that stuff is out there. So like, I think they've got to put up a good showing against Ohio State, but I think and look, they win, obviously they're in, that's 100%. But I think this is setting up perfectly. I really do. You get the 2 weeks off, maybe get a little bit healthier and, kind of go back and look at what you did. But what I'll say, this was the best win for Indiana because this is the best defense they played.
Yes. Agree with that.
And I think they had a chance to blow this game open at the end of the first half. And there were some calls, the way things went at the end of the first half was not the way that Curt Cignetti would have envisioned or liked. And so I'm sure that is a big focus as they go in and watch some of that tape this weekend and then into this week. So figuring out ways to beat man coverage, I think was something. Got a little tight, got some tight coverage from Michigan here. They were without Will Johnson. They had some trouble running the football against the best front, that they've seen all year long with Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham, but found a way to get it done when they really needed to. And again, just a gritty win and a sign of a team playing good team football there to find a way. Defense rose up in a big way in that second half. So I feel pretty good about where the Hoosiers sit. And it's not just because of the hat on my head or the towel in the background here. I legitimately feel like as the number 5 team in the country, number 8 in the CFP a week ago, they're going to find a way to remain in that top 12 here when all things are considered.
We're living in the Sig 10, baby.
That is.
And especially the loss for Georgia and Miami, that's going to shake things up a little bit. I don't expect you're going to see a drastic shuffling of the top 10, for instance, even the top 5. You'll see Penn State and Indiana gain a little ground because of that, because they won this past weekend. But I'm very interested to see what that looks like Tuesday night once that comes out. So the big game this past weekend, Windiana stays undefeated, 10-0 now after beating Michigan. Let's get to our biggest performers of the weekend: quarterback, playmaker, and defense. Let's start off with the biggest quarterback performance of the weekend. Rhett, in your opinion, who was it?
Yeah, Will Howard gets the nod for me in Ohio State's dominant performance over Purdue, 45-0. Will Howard goes 21-26, 260 yards, 3 touchdowns through the air. One of them to Jeremiah Smith on his historic freshman campaign, and then also adds a rushing touchdown, does Will Howard. So, look, you're supposed to win this game. You're supposed to dominate this game. They did. They did all that. And I think that, a game like this was nice to see from Will Howard, right? Was, 81% of his passes, completing. fifth straight game with multiple touchdowns, longest active streak nationally. Fifth time he's completed at least 80% of his throws, and the fourth time this year he's had at least 250 passing yards. Like everything you wanted from a quarterback performance in a Big Ten game, you got from Ohio State. Did they need it all? No, they didn't. And again, you can look at the opponent, but I just think that going into the home stretch of this season for Ohio State, seeing the quarterback be so efficient and find ways to win through the air, and a game they probably could have just handed it off 45 times and won. I thought, again, it just speaks to the type of player that he has been for this offense and that they expect him to be moving forward. What do you got, Tom?
Will Howard, I agree with you, and especially the Penn State win on the road in a hostile environment,
yes,
top 4 matchup. That was a big confidence builder for him. Not that he necessarily needed it, but after the Oregon game, there were questions. I think he answered a lot of questions against Ohio State to keep the momentum rolling against an inferior opponent, albeit, but still keeping that rolling. I agree with you, Will Howard, that he's building a lot of momentum as the quarterback, not just a game manager or anything like that. He can change the game for Ohio State. For me, this is more of a feel-good one. UCLA quarterback Ethan Garbers. UCLA beats Iowa, an upset in Los Angeles. Garbers goes 21 for 34. I know that's not terribly impressive, but 203 yards passing. I know that's not terribly impressive. 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. I know that's not terribly impressive. 4 carries for 23 yards. The fact of the matter is you hosted Iowa. As a team, you played complementary football, and Garbers is somebody who's been under fire quite a bit throughout this season, and that he was banged up a little bit earlier on. His backup played against Penn State when UCLA came to visit Happy Valley, and there were certainly questions, at least to my eye, watching his backup play that maybe this is the guy. Garbers had struggled at that point in the season. It just seems like they found their footing. Are they going to completely shake up the Big Ten? No, but I was encouraged by it because Deshaun Foster, I think everybody counted him out the second he opened his mouth at Big Ten Media Day. Garbers was certainly maybe felt like a lame duck quarterback after some transfers left. A lot of questions of what is the identity of this team. For them to go Iowa on Iowa was pretty impressive. They ran the ball extremely well. Garbers played a smart game. Yes, the interceptions, you'd love to see those go away. You'd love to see the completion percentage come up. But that was, just like I said with Will Howard, a confidence builder for a program that is at least making some noise in the middle of the Big Ten. Far better than USC is. I would dare to say better than Washington is at this point. They are showing that these teams that came from the Pac-12 can do something and make some noise in the middle of the Big Ten and maybe find their way to something successful next year. And I just thought that was a moment of growth for Ethan Garbers.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because I think he was my best quarterback performance last week, if I'm not mistaken.
I think that's right. That's 2 weeks in a row. We love Garbers.
In a row. All right, Ethan.
We believe in Garbers.
Look, this is really interesting. I've done 3 UCLA games now, and so like I've seen their growth. They were 1-5. When we maybe it was 1-4. I think it was 1-5 when my crew did the UCLA Minnesota game at the Rose Bowl, and it came down to the very end. And UCLA probably should have won that game. Minnesota ended up sneaking it out. Then we go with them to Rutgers out in Piscataway, and they get their first Big Ten win. It happens on the road. And then we come back, and we're with them after their bye week in Lincoln, Nebraska, and then they stack another dub and get that done on the road in Lincoln, 2 in a row. Then they come back home on homecoming now and take care of business against Iowa on a short week on a Friday night. Ethan Garbers is playing some really good football, man. And now here's the weird thing about this is not weird, but it's just kind of interesting to follow because so many of these UCLA players have talked about just how complex and how difficult it has been to learn Eric Bieniemy and his offense. Right, comes from the NFL, but obviously has spent time in the college ranks before he went to the NFL as well. Was a running backs coach at UCLA, coached the great Maurice Jones-Drew, one of my good buddies. But even Maurice told me it takes time with this offense. It takes time to understand, to figure out exactly what, not necessarily what you're supposed to do, but how you're supposed to react, right? Once you understand what the play call is and how you're supposed to execute. And it feels like that this season for UCLA can be split into pre-Ethan Garbers injury and post-Ethan Garbers injury.
That's a great way to put it.
Right? Because they are a completely different team since he has come back off that injury after missing the Penn State game. They played some pretty good football against Penn State. I think you started to see things change a little bit. They found their best offensive line combination against Penn State, and they've used that every game since. So that's a big piece of it. Their playmakers are getting healthy. TJ Harden rushed for 125 yards.
I know.
Like
that's what Deshaun Foster's wanted to do from the get-go. As a running back, it was like, hey, we've got to figure out a way to run the football. And they finally did, especially on Iowa, who has defensively looked pretty good lately.
Yeah.
And
I mean, always.
I was more stunned, Rhett, by UCLA's defense limiting Iowa offensively. Like, the quarterback struggles are one thing, but the fact that you held Caleb Johnson, a Heisman potential, to 18 for 49, granted one touchdown, but that was all he got, and that was early in the game, held Iowa to 31 carries for 80 yards, 2.6 yards per carry. That's troubling if you're an Iowa fan.
Hey, Tom, you want to just skip ahead because you just painted the perfect picture for my best defensive performance.
Let's get to biggest defensive performance of the weekend. Go Rhett.
UCLA, baby. I mean, how could you look any further? I mean, look, I know it doesn't take a ton to keep Iowa's passing game under wraps, which they did, clearly. A couple of turnovers in that way. Carson Schlesinger, who is one of the best linebackers in this conference and didn't even start until like week 3 for UCLA. He had 2 interceptions in this game. He had 7 tackles. UCLA outrushes Iowa by 131 yards. Let that sink in for a second, folks.
Yeah.
We're talking about Caleb Johnson is held to what was the final number on Caleb? It was, let me see. Hold on.
I think it was about 49 yards.
Yeah. I mean, that doesn't happen. 18 carries, 49 yards. And as you mentioned, he did get the score, but they had 80 rushing yards total. Like, that was a dominant defensive performance. And Akaika Malloy, who is the defensive coordinator, who was a holdover for Deshaun Foster, kind of learned under Danton Lynn, who was the DC at UCLA last year, and then obviously moved cross down to USC. So they promoted Akaika Malloy to the defensive coordinator spot, and he has been phenomenal. He is one of the most impressive guys that you could talk to in the coaching profession. Like, he gets into the nitty gritty, man. And we were so, grateful for, all the insight that he gave us, into what they were trying to do, how they were going to try to attack. And it just all really made sense. It was like, you could see it, and you could see the players understand it. They're putting their guys in positions to make plays, like Carson Schlesinger. They're letting him make these run-through tackles, and that's because Big J Toia up front is able to eat up blocks and allow those run-throughs to make those tackles for loss. And it's just they have it working right now, and they're hitting on all cylinders. Really, as a team, like this, I'm just going to put it down. UCLA is going to find their way after a 1-5 start to bowl eligibility this season. UCLA Bruins are right now, and the 3-game win streak is a big reason why.
I think I agree with that. UCLA currently
is a big reason why.
It is. And if they continue to run the ball well, Garbers needs to get the turnovers under control, but still 4-5, 3-4 in the conference for UCLA. Iowa was trending, now 6-4, 4-3 in the conference. So we're going to have to keep an eye on Iowa. My biggest defense performance of the weekend goes to Rutgers. Not only was this the Ethan Kaliakmanis revenge game, but the defense for Rutgers played extremely well. You beat Minnesota in Piscataway. You held Darius Taylor to 28 yards rushing. You held Minnesota overall to 35 total yards rushing, and then less than 2 yards per carry. Defensively, Rutgers 4 sacks, 8 tackles for loss, 8 passes defensed, and 1 fumble recovered. And by the way, as a team, you did this all without Kyle Monungai. I thought Rutgers was dead in the water the way they'd been playing as of late. Kaliakmanis was a 4-star recruit to Minnesota. I had felt like, man, this guy was just drastically over-evaluated somehow. Kaliakmanis has a good game, but the Rutgers defense, I know you've covered them so far this season, Brett, they look good.
Well, and here's the thing. I think they started getting some guys healthy after that USC game, and that was big, right? Like Tyreen Powell, got back into he did not look 100% when we saw him play against UCLA. But he comes back. He has 8 tackles in this game. Daryl Jabame, 3 TFLs in this game. He had a sack. He was a machine. 11 solo tackles on Minnesota. That was fantastic. Robert Longerbeam, Flip Dixon, like those guys, that have kind of been the mainstays there for that team, I think that was big. Shaquan Loyal, in there too, Desmond Igbenogson, like those guys that, have been counted on for Rutgers, stepped up and played some big games. So I thought that's where they had, their biggest trouble against UCLA a couple of weeks ago, and against USC was at the linebacker core, but Jabame and Powell combined for 21 total tackles in this game. So that was more like it, right, for what Rutgers wants to do. But yeah, that was a good shout out there to halting a 4-game losing streak, getting yourself to within a game of bowl eligibility here with the final 3 games to play, had to feel good for Curt Cignetti.
Yeah. Let's get to our biggest playmaker, and we do need to touch on what the number 1 team in the country, Oregon, did this past weekend. But for me, the biggest playmaker of the weekend, and I'm biased, Penn State tight end Tyler Warren. Penn State dominates.
That's not biased, dude. That's just real.
It's real, and it's a little biased, but still, Penn State dominates Washington at home. They rebound from the loss against Ohio State, and by dominate, I mean it was 28-0 at halftime. Penn State put a lot of subs in the second half, took their foot off the gas, focused on running the football. But Tyler Warren just did freaking everything again. 8 catches for 75 yards. 3 carries for 7 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. He had 2 pass attempts as well. Didn't complete anything, but still, like, the versatility is incredible. Penn State learned its lesson from the Ohio State game in terms of, hey, we should use Tyler Warren when we're inside the 5. And they did that. And now you have this iconic image of him surfing over the Washington defensive line to score a touchdown that is going to live forever in the history of Penn State football. But overall, Penn State puts on tape what they needed to put on tape following that loss to Ohio State. I certainly have questioned their overall ability to win a national championship. Did this change my opinion? No, but you needed to come back and beat somebody badly in your house in a whiteout. You got snubbed. This whiteout game just didn't have the significance. Penn State fans have been ticked off about the TV situation for a while.
How'd the IMAX thing go? Did anybody follow?
I didn't get to see the IMAX, but like I was worried after the Ohio State game. You put 111,000 people in the stadium, the largest recorded attendance in Beaver Stadium history. I was like, there's going to be some ticked off fans. Still, 110,000 people showed up for a whiteout game that got bumped to freaking Peacock. So this was encouraging that the fan base, the team rebounded. They look confident overall. And Tyler Warren continues to make a tremendous case for himself for the Horning Award, for the Mackey Award. Like, he is doing some things that I think about players from the National Football League, like Kyle Usich for the 49ers. I think about Chris Cooley once upon a time.
Cooley, good one.
With Washington, Dallas Clark famously with Peyton Manning and the Indianapolis Colts. And it's not just because a lot of these guys have worn numbers in the 40s or 44 exactly, but still, Tyler Warren shows his versatility that you just don't see very often. And especially when you can line up a dude that's 6'5", 265 and runs like a 4.5 in shotgun and do a little bit of everything. I don't know how you defend that, but that's my biggest playmaker of the weekend.
I think you're spot on there. I strongly considered Tyler Warren, but do you know who has the second most receptions in the Big Ten over the course of the last month? Do you know who has the most explosive pass receptions in the Big Ten over the course of the last month? Demir Miller from Rutgers, 22 catches over the last 4 weeks. Nine of those were explosive plays. So went for more than 15 yards in the pass game for a very limited pass game traditionally here with the way that Rutgers wants to attack. Demir Miller had 5 catches, 58 yards, and 2 touchdowns from Nathan Kaliakmanis in this win over Minnesota. And I remember talking to some NFL scouts ahead of the game that we had, my Big Ten Network crew had against UCLA in Piscataway. And, we're kind of going through some of the guys that have draftable grades coming into this season. And Demir Miller wasn't one of them. But the way that Demir Miller has played had him on the, hey, we need to watch this guy. We need to watch what he does this season because he could certainly talk his way and play his way rather into a draftable type of player situation. And I think that's firmly what he's doing right now. He is the most explosive player on Rutgers' offense. Even considering Kyle Monangai, because I think Demir Miller's just got, the breakaway gene, maybe a little bit more than Monangai has. So I think that is a huge plus for Rutgers as they continue to move forward here this year, that you have a guy that you can really count on for big plays in the pass game. man, maybe Bo Melton was the last guy a couple of years ago that fit that bill for them. But I think Demir Miller is deserving of some serious credit on that front.
It's really helped out Callie McManus. There's deficiencies within his game as a passer, and having that, a security guy, so to speak, that
by the way
is huge.
Like the crossover here, right? So Kirk Shiraka was at Minnesota like two different times as the offensive coordinator, left to become Rutgers offensive coordinator. You had the Rutgers or the Minnesota defensive coordinator came from Rutgers. Greg Schiano hired PJ Fleck down in Tampa. Callie McManus went from Minnesota to this was a very, pardon the word, incestual type of game, okay, for Rutgers in Minnesota. It was a close one. But man, that Rutgers defense at the end, as you mentioned, the 2 sacks of Max Brosmer, the last one on that drive that ended up in the safety, went from a 2-point Minnesota lead to a 7-point Rutgers lead in the span of 2 drives right there, which was pretty important for Rutgers to ultimately come away with that win. So a lot of good performances there.
So we've covered the big game. We've covered our biggest quarterback, playmaker, and defensive performances from this weekend. We do need to give some love to the Oregon Ducks, number 1 team in the country. We've got a few minutes remaining here. What did you think about their victory against Maryland? It didn't, I don't think it was ever a question that they were going to win this game, but still, I know you love what Indiana's put together as a roster, but I firmly believe Oregon's the most complete team in the Big Ten. What do you think?
Well, yeah, especially when, you could throw a touchdown pass to an offensive tackle. You can have a defensive end go on a fake punt for 36 yards. The reverse pass that drew a pass interference penalty, a backup O-lineman, 2-point conversion on direct snap to an offensive tackle. Like, holy smokes. Like Will Stein, the OC was like, hey, I got these trick plays are burning a hole in my pocket here.
Right.
I think we just let these out.
He watched Andy Kotelnicki at Kansas. He's like, watch this.
Hold my beer, friend. I've got you. And man, there you go. It did feel closer, this game. I thought Maryland put up a valiant effort in this game. I think the turnovers obviously did them in. A couple of picks by Billy Edwards and a fumble loss by Billy Edwards. But for Dylan Gabriel, it wasn't, prolific through the air, but had 3 touchdowns, got Terrence Ferguson into the end zone, which I think is a big piece. They need to get Ferg going. I felt like he'd been waiting on it all year. He was obviously banged up a little bit this year, but they're 10-0 now for the 3rd time in school history. Jordan Birch is playing like a madman off the edge now that he's back from injury. Brandon Johnson, had a fumble return for a score. So again, this did mimic the Indiana win in ways in which, maybe there wasn't as much anxiety on Oregon side as there was for Indiana's down the stretch here, but offense, defense, special teams came together to form a victory.
Billy Edwards has something at Maryland. It's not been realized yet, but he has some ability.
Oh, he's a gamer, dude. He's an absolute baller. He has to find a way. To me, I think, have I said this on this show, but he feels like the backup quarterback in the program. If you remember watching, when Joe Kane goes down, the backup quarterback comes in. He's got a ton of talent. He's
had to kick him off campus.
Competitive,
he couldn't be there for a minute. He was
competitive edge type of guy. But it just the turnovers end up coming back to get him. So I think they can find some winning football with Billy Edwards. Just obviously wasn't going to happen at Autzen Stadium.
No. Dylan Gabriel sets the record for the most touchdowns in FBS history. When you play for 47 years, you're bound to set a few records, but it's sincerely Dylan Gabriel.
180 total TDs. 180, bud.
It's wild. Between UCF, Oklahoma, and Oregon, you couldn't have picked 3 better schools in terms of you're going to put up stats and touchdowns. You just are in those systems overall. But Jordan James, a little dinged up in this game, so that's a point to keep an eye on. As you mentioned, no Tez Johnson. So seeing other guys get involved in the passing game was important. Oregon's just staying the course, and they're fortunate the way that the rest of their schedule shakes out. It's a just win sort of situation for them. So even if these games are a little bit closer, you're not losing too much sleep over it. But Oregon is going to have to prove some things in terms of what they can do defensively. I think Ohio State was a great test for them defensively, but when you're going up against some of the larger, more powerful offensive and defensive lines, when you get into the college football playoff, I think that's going to be a consistent question. Dylan Gabriel and the receivers in the running game, they continue to churn. So this offense is going to do its thing, but defensively, I think that's where the question is going to come in November and December.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're on point. But man, when you start fast the way that Oregon does, it gives you a little bit of a runway right into the second half. Now you don't want to have to, use that as cushion, but you also break down the opposing team when you're up by double digits at halftime that way. And so it changes the way that they want to play. And I think that played into Oregon's hands too with some of the turnovers. So Oregon continues to roll, and book your flights for Indianapolis. Like that's where they'll be in the Big Ten championship.
Ducks, Hoosiers, not
now.
Ducks.
See,
maybe
you're learning here, Tom.
Maybe
You're learning here, buddy.
Hey, a lot's going to go down on November 23rd. Indiana is.
What happens then?
Out.
Oh yeah,
little game at the Horseshoe that's going to decide everything and upset the whole world. Thanks for tuning in this weekend. That was the weekend that was in Big Ten football. This has been Believe in Big Ten. I'm Tom Hannifan. He's Rhett Lewis. Get at us on social media. Tell us what you think of the weekend that was and how you feel about the Week 12 slate, the new rankings that are going to come out. Like, comment, subscribe, rate us, and turn on notifications. We'll see you later on this week as we look ahead to Week 12.